How's it going, PD team? I've got an important video for you today addressing a common situation when doing product visualization. When illustrating a product that requires technical detail, oftentimes you need to animate cutaways revealing internal parts. I'll be showing you a dynamic way of approaching such a task, which allows plenty of adjustment and art directing. We'll tackle things like stickers, cut highlighting, cut controls, and post keyframe animation curves, ultimately building a powerful controller using Cinema 4D's node-based programming language. If you haven't watched part 1 of this series where we accurately rig a shock's coil, you'll definitely want to check that out. Link will be in the description below. With that being said, let's dive in. Okay, so I've already built out the controller that we're going to be working on today. You can see we have the open slider and it just reveals the internal parts. Something tricky is happening here. One problem that you're going to run into with the Boolean tool is when this slice is really small, it can tend to glitch out. So I've got that we're going to be addressing. And once we add keyframes to this open feature, a client might give you a change where they say, I want this to open up less. We can type in 60 or 50, and we still don't have to adjust the keyframes for the open animation. So you can see we have a max value. And I often do this with my controllers. I'll allow for a max value so that you don't have to make adjustments to your keyframes. Next, we have the slice cut height. So if the client wants this lower, we can do that as well. And then we have post keyframe animation curves. So I don't need to go into the keyframes to adjust how this opens up. We can adjust the easing on the in or the out by just moving this point handle. One thing you'll note that I've included in this animation curve is I locked the position and the rotation of this curve, so we just have easing and we don't run into the issue of accidentally moving these points. Next, your client might want a variation on the cut highlighting, so we give a drop field where we can add a shader to this specific area, and I made it bright blue just so it's easier to see, but you might want a different metal, or like this is anodized aluminum, so maybe you want the silver to show up as the cutaway. And then lastly, if you have a lot of these cutaways happening on a rig, my original rig had 3 cutaways and it gets pretty slow to play back, so I can enable and disable the cutaway. So you can see if I hit play, the timeline goes a lot faster than when I have the cutaway animation. You can see it's kind of slower, so that is kind of a quick fix. So let's go ahead and build this out. If you want to follow along, this model of the reservoir of the shock will be available. Link will be in the description below. Okay, so let's get started. Basically, we have this casing that I pulled out from our bigger project, so we can just focus on this one item. And we'll start off with adding a null and call this reservoir. And inside, we're going to place our casing. And then we'll also add, holding shift, we'll add another null and call this Xpresso. I like changing the icon, so I'll select this one here and make it white. So there's our Xpresso. We're going to right click, go to programming tags, Xpresso. And I've docked my Xpresso window into the viewport. So yours might appear like this floating. What you do is you just take the hamburger button and drag it onto this hamburger and it nests it. There's a couple ways of doing this cutaway. The way I'm going to show you is probably the most dynamic and gives you the cleanest geometry. The way I used to do it years ago was I'd take a cylinder and go to slice and slice away and use this as a cutaway. But if I go here to NB, you see that it gives you really bad geometry. So it gives you all these triangles and whatnot. Okay, now that we have our structure set up, we have a group for the reservoir, the Xpresso, and our casing all nested nicely. So next what we're going to do is we're going to add an arch and we'll change it to X and Z, and that puts it on the flat plane. And we'll set the value to something like 20 so you can see it's smaller. If we set it to segment, what we get is we get kind of a Pac-Man wedge, and I'll set the curvature to subdivided. We don't get bad polygons. And then I'm going to go to my front view and just drag this down and zoom in and get it relatively close. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then what we'll do is we'll extrude it. So we'll go to extrude and hold down Alt and let go. And you'll notice extrudes downwards. So what we need to do to the arch is we need to reverse the order. We want nice clean values when we're doing this. And I'm going to set the height to something like 55. And there you go. So this is what's going to be called our cutter. So I'll rename it to cutter, and I'll add a Boolean for the casing. And I'm using the new Boolean. Hold down Alt while I let go. And then I'll add the cutter inside the Boolean. And we're going to change our setting to subtract. And you can see when we add these values here, set it to 5 degrees so we can see where it's starting. And it's starting from this back corner. So we want clean values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my arch and rotate it to -90. So the first slice is facing forward. And then as we take this value and bring it up, it opens up more. So if I want it halfway open, I'll set it to 90 and 90. So this will go to -90. So you can see we have nice clean values. That's really important when we do the Xpresso. So there's our rig. So our rig is basically going to address the angles here, the cutter height. So we can set up a value and say, let's say we don't want to cut it as high, or maybe we want to go higher, something like 60, so we can see the threading at the top. We'll leave it just like that. I'll call this Boolean reservoir. Next, what I like doing is I have a shortcut, but I want to keep this cutter locked. So I'm going to add a protection tag. I'm also going to add it onto the casing as well, so we don't accidentally move it. So you find that when you right click and you go to rigging tags, you'll see there's a protection tag in there. So let's go ahead and start our Xpresso setup. So what I'll do is I'm going to double click and I'm going to drag my reservoir null in, button, and this is what's going to be our controller. So I like making it nice and big. And we first want to start off with this arch. So we'll drag our arch in, and we want the start angle and the end angle. Make it nice and big. And what we want to do is we want to have just a percentage slider on this reservoir null. So I'll go to manage user data, and we'll add a group, call this controller, and we'll add a data. And we're going to call this open casing. We'll leave the defaults. We'll add the max and min values for the slider, and then we'll change the float to a float slider. And you can see we have a slider now that we can move back and forth. So we'll go to our shop controller, and we're going to right click in our Xpresso area here, go to calculate and do a range mapper. And the range mapper is going to allow us to convert this percentage value, which we're going to drag in, into a usable number that we can use for the start angle. So I'll go ahead and add it in. So what we want to do is we want to select where it says user defined input range. We want to set that to %, and that'll put the input values, which it's inputting in 100%. And then we want to spit out an angle. So we're going to come in here and say degrees. Make sure you select degrees, and we'll set this to 90. And then we'll do end angle, because our end angle is the positive value. Then what we're going to do is we want to do an invert of this value for the start angle. So I'm going to go here to calculate math, and we'll take our value and multiply it by -1. And then we can minimize this. So let's try it out. And there you go. And you can see we have a value here that goes halfway. So 90 and 90 is 180, which is halfway. We want to be able to set it when it's at 100%. We want to set a max value here. So what I like doing is I like coming in here to this angle here, and I can just say user interface, copy user interface, go to my reservoir and say paste user data, and we'll drag it below, and we'll call this max angle. And we want to do 0 to 90 because we don't want it open more than 90 degrees. And we'll set our max value here to 90 in the slider, and we'll set this to 90 degrees. Let's do 60. So there's our max angle. We'll go to our Xpresso, drag in our max angle. And then in our input range, if we select it, our range mapper has this output upper that we want to plug in. So I'm going to just go here to output upper and drag our max angle in. So now what we can do is we can go back to our project here, and we have it set to 100% open. And then we can select how far open it is. So we can do 65, and there you go. Next, what we want to add is we want to add a height for how high this cuts. So we'll go to our Xpresso, and we'll come in here to the cutter, and we'll copy this user interface. So copy user interface, go to our reservoir, paste user data, call this cut height, hit enter, and we'll set the minimum to something like 1 and the slider to 1. So we get a teeny slice, and the max will do 100 because it doesn't need to be any higher. And we'll set the height to something like 65. We'll drag our cut height in, drag our cutter in, and select the cutter, and we'll bring in this offset and plug it in directly. I'm going to expand the range mapper because we're going to add another feature into it. And we want in our controller the ability to change the curvature of this animation. So to do that, we need a curve, and we're going to steal the curve from here. So I'm going to right click on this spline, user interface, copy user interface, go to my reservoir, paste user data, drag it below, and I'll call this animation curve, and we'll access it right here. So to do that, we just click this here and drag in spline. We'll drag our spline in, which is called animation curve. I'm going to change the order here. There we go. So now we select this. We have a curve for this opening and closing. So I like setting a default curve. So I'm going to right click and say spline preset linear. I'm going to select both of these points, right click and say point type soft. And then I'm going to select and drag this down and this up here like that. And then I'm going to open this little caret arrow that allows us to change the left. We'll zero it out. We'll do the same for this one. Zero it out. Now I want to lock the points. So I'm going to lock this, and then I also want to lock the angle as well, so I don't accidentally rotate it. So I'm going to lock angle and lock position. So now you can see we can just drag these for how much easing we want. So let's try it out. So you can see if I drag this out, you get a lot of easing at the last bit. Whoa, hold on a second. So you made it this far. Clearly, you're enjoying the content. Would you consider clicking the thanks button on this video to help grow the channel's community so I can make more great content just for you? Any amount is greatly appreciated. If money is tight right now, then do me a favor and just smash that like button immediately. Now to the video. Now, one thing that I like to do just to prevent any problems when animating, when you have these animation curves with easing, is you get a glitch where your model might disappear. So to fix that, we can put an if-else statement in here. So if this value is really small, like 0.1, see it disappears. And so when we add an animation to this keyframe here, it can disappear and flicker. So to fix that, and we'll be able to add a expression in here that allows us to basically turn on and off the enable. So I'm going to add the reservoir and the cutter, and we're going to disable these. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to click on it and say enable. We also want to have a function where we can enable and disable. So I'm going to go here to manage user data, select the controller and say add, and we'll just call this enable cut, and we'll change this to a Boolean. We'll leave it checked, hit OK. We'll drag the enable in. I'm going to bring it up to the top. And what we want to do is we want to have a condition statement. So I'm going to right click, go to logic, and we're going to do a condition, which will be the switch for enabling and disabling. But we also want to have it disabled when the value is below 1%. So we're going to right click, Xpresso, logic, compare. So let's put this in the correct order. We'll put the cutters over here. We'll have the condition right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the open is our casing, is the 0 to 100%. And we want to say, is this value greater than or equal to 0.1? Do something. In this case, switch. We're going to leave the condition to 0 and 1. And when you enable and disable, you're literally typing 0 or 1 in here. So what we can do is we can try this out. So we'll connect these and we'll try the slider here. So you can see they're disabled right now. So next step, let's get this enable cut to work. And to do that, we're going to add another condition that takes place after. So this will override these values. So I'll right click, Xpresso, logic, condition, and we'll say, remember the first input is off, second one's on. So when it's on, we want these values to work. So we plug that in and then we'll take our switch, add it in, and then we'll take our connections, plug them in here. And as of now, we're missing our arch. So let's go ahead and do that, because when we enable and disable, I'll show you what happens. So I'll go to the reservoir here and just go halfway and enable and disable. You can see we have this curve in here. So this is working properly. So it's disabled and enabled. And if I go to 0, you can see it's disabled here. Go to 1 frame forward on the percentage, and now it's enabled. So let's get that arch working. So go to the arch here, basic properties, enabled, and plug it in. We're almost done. So next what I want to do is I want a little drop field in here where we can put in a texture for this edge. So to do that, we're going to add 2 textures. I've already got a material in here called sleeve. I'll add it to the casing here. And then I'm going to make a new material where I just bring this up, make it blue, drag it onto the cutter. And you can see we get a nice edge highlight. Now I want to make this field droppable. So to do that, we're going to go in here and we'll go to our reservoir, go to our material here. If I select the tag, right click on this material, say user interface, copy user interface, go to my reservoir, paste user data, drag it just above the enable cut. We have a drop field and I'll call this edge cut. Hit OK. We'll drag our edge cut into our properties here. We'll drag the actual tag for the shader into the Xpresso window. And then we'll go back to our tag and select the material input, drag it in, and then we just can link it up directly like so. So now I can go back to my field here and I can put in the reservoir, we can pick like a sleeve, or we can pick this highlighted color like so. So there's the edge cut highlight. And you can see when we have small values, we don't get that error that happens. So when it's in small values, it doesn't glitch out. Next, what I want to talk about is stickers. So what you would do is I want to limit. So let's disable this. I go to my casing here and do an edge selection. So I make this loop selection here. And then I'm going to go to select, store selection. So we get a tag. And then what you do is you apply to the reservoir, the sticker material, and drag in the selection, the polygon selection. Now I want to mention that this sticker will only work in Cinema 4D 2025.2. If you have 0.1, which was the previous Boolean tool when they first introduced it, the sticker ability did not work. It would disappear. So make sure you're up at the latest version of Cinema 4D to get the sticker, the multi-layers on your Boolean objects to work properly. And here you go. Here's the Boolean feature doing cutaways with full customization. So we can change the height, the max angle, and we can art direct it. And then we can do animation curves, drag in a material, and enable and disable the feature. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you found this useful. Thanks so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more content. Thanks for your support.